Hi, it's Hope Yoder with another Embellish Maker Fundamental Video 6. When you open your program, you have the welcome screen, and to get a new page, go under File and New. In this video, we're going to talk about the convert icons. Before we do that, let's draw a simple rectangle shape. We've got this shape of just artwork. I'll close out the design menu and we'll come in to our first tool we're going to talk about today, which is standard fill. The half or quarter donut shapes pertain to satin stitch and their more advanced features, and we'll go over that later on in the fundamental videos. Right now, let's talk about fill and satin stitches. So in this rectangle of artwork, if we click on the standard fill, let me show you what that's going to look like. You've got a standard fill stitch. If you wanted to change this in the properties window, select it, and let me zoom in a little bit. You have pattern 1, but you also have several other choices. For instance, here you have cornrow. Select apply when you're done, and you can see how this looks different. I'm going to turn this back into artwork by selecting it and then select the artwork tool. The next thing we'll talk about is taking this artwork rectangle and we can turn it into a fancy filled stitch by selecting fancy fill. You select off and you see that you have almost embossed looking pattern. You've got some options in the pattern drop down window. You can change that and then select apply, and you can see how that looks a little different. Also going to change this back into artwork. So we've talked about the standard and the fancy fill. The next technique, the convert technique, is a motif fill. This would be like filling that rectangle with sewing machine decorative stitches. I'm going to select Motif Vil, and let's zoom in a little bit. And this is very close together and would take a long time to stitch. So with this motif, if I wanted it to be spaced further apart, I'm going to change the motif pattern size. Right now it's at 3. I'm going to select 5, apply, and you can see it gets bigger. Let's go to 7, apply, and it gets even bigger. You can also change the type of decorative stitching done in there. So in the drop down window across from pattern, you can go ahead and change that to anything you wish. Select apply, and the same thing, you've got motif pattern size. You can change this to go larger or smaller. I'm going to turn this back into artwork, so it is no longer stitches, and tell you about the next feature, which is the gradient fill. And this is linear stitches that start close together and spread further apart, kind of like an ombre pattern. I'm going to select gradient fill, and you can see, let's zoom in, and you can see how the stitches are very close, almost like a solid fill, and then they get further and further apart. To change this, you've got some different properties that you can play around with. One of the things, the gradient density, is how far it is apart, and right now you have it at 0.17. Let's see what happens when we change it to 0.25, and you can see that opens it up even more. Let's go to 0.5. So you've got wider spacing. We'll zoom in on that so you can see how that changes. One other thing that's really cool in here that I like to play around with is underneath the gradient density that I was just showing you, you have color blend. And if you select and check mark that and select apply, this will allow you to use different colors of thread. So instead of one color of thread, you may have 2 colors of thread. And then you've got different areas to apply here and play with. So let's come over in this sequence window so you can see that I have one color of thread, and then if I wanted two different shades of thread, for instance, we've got the blue, but then if we just take a different tone, you get this ombre looking effect. So there's a lot of features in here that you can just play around with, and if you don't like it, don't save it. If you love it, save it and give it a stitch to try it out. I'm going to take this rectangle and turn it back into artwork. So we've shown you the standard fill, fancy, motif fill, gradient fill, and the color blend fill is similar to what I just showed you. We're going to select color blend, and now you can see in the properties window, if I select this, that I have two different colors of thread. If you want to change areas in the property window, you can kind of just play around with these different drop down menus to see what you like best. You've got some options here. And then let's play with the gradient density, and you can change them here, and I have 0.17, so let's do 0.25. And this is very similar to what we've just shown you. Let me select the rectangle and turn it back into artwork. And we've got an open fill, and we'll just select that. Let me zoom in. These are really great. I just want to encourage you guys, don't be afraid to click away. Just get really click happy. If you don't like it, don't save it. That's how I learn. I look at it and I think, that looks pretty cool. So I'll stitch it out. If it looks good, great. If it doesn't look good on the computer, you probably don't want to waste your time stitching it out. So here we can change different things in the properties window as well. You've got different patterns. If there's a drop down menu, just click away and see what you like. And I'll make that gradient density less. You can just play around with that. I'm going to turn this back into artwork, and we have auto stipple. Let me zoom out. I'm going to stipple inside of that area. I can change the density is what will space these further apart or closer together. You can see I've got a tighter stipple, or if I change that to 5, I have a looser stipple. You select this and turn it back into artwork. And here we have cross stitch, and this is pretty self-explanatory. If I select this, it's going to give me a cross work pattern, or cross stitch rather. And if I want to make the size bigger or smaller, I'm going to do that by changing this size. If I go to 5, this would be similar. If you max this out enough, it may look like cross hatching. I'm going to change this back into a rectangle. And here I have a run stitch. So I can select a run. Now this doesn't look like much on the screen, but what I want to show you, the slow redraw down here, will show you how to see what the stitching looks like. To get rid of that, simply click on this area. But what I can do is change this run stitch. It's a single run now. I have the option of a double run. And when I do the slow redraw, you can see that it's going to go 1 stitch around and the second time around. My other option is a motif stitch. So we have single run, double run, or a motif. And that'll just do decorative stitches. In the motif drop down menu, you've got a lot of great stitches to play with. The repeats or the motif size, this is going to give you larger or smaller stitches. You can see the difference between the 2.5 versus the 8. I'm going to turn this back into artwork, and then we'll go over our run motif. That's similar to what I just showed you, but under the motif type, you've got the same thing. This is basically a repeat of what the last function was. We turn this back into artwork. We'll take this rectangle and now we'll turn it into a satin stitch. You've got your stitch width and your density. You've got underlay options. All of these over in this area, and in your property, your sequence view and the slow redraw, you can see that it is going to stitch a nice satin stitch. In this area, let's turn this back into, let me select it, turn it back into a rectangle, and our last convert is applique. So if I select this, I can turn this into an applique. What's different about applique and satin stitch, while it looks the same, notice it gave me a placement line, a tack down line, and a satin stitch. Now if I go back into the properties and select all, I can change the applique type from a satin stitch to a blanket stitch. If I want my stitch is to be closer together, that's going to be density. Notice I have more stitches. The stitch length and the width is how far in the bites are. For instance, this would be horrible, you'd never do that, but just to show you, 7 millimeters is a very large bite into the fabric. You're probably going to go somewhere between 3 and 4. So we'll pick 3.5 and that looks good. So you also have the option to do a motif applique, and you've got different motifs to choose from depending on what you like to create. Or the applique could be a run stitch, and in that run stitch, let's hit apply. You've got your tack down offset. You can even select fabric. So if you wanted to see what this is going to look like, you could select a fabric. Now, why would you want to do a run stitch applique? Well, maybe you want to do a raw edge applique, which is really cool. And then you would trim the fabric outside to get a nice, cool, trendy look. The last thing I want to show you is chenille. Woohoo! Can you say chenille? One click wonder. Let me take this rectangle, turn it back into artwork. And now for my favorite technique, chenille. I'm going to click on chenille and bam, I'm done. Let me show you what happens here. It's like an applique. It's going to give you a placement line for your foundation fabric. Next is a tack down line. And then you have your chenille channels. Now we have a whole video for you on how to embroider chenille. So look for that. It's called Chenille, Easy Chenille. And we do a project from start to finish. So let's just kind of go back to this chenille. You have a couple options. If you select all of these, select everything, you'll get the chenille to show up. You have 60 degrees or a negative 60 degrees. Look what happens when I select negative. The columns go the other direction. You can control the stitch length if you want it to be a tighter stitch length. So that is chenille. And I will show you what a finished chenille design looks like in a moment.